Let's turn to the psalm then that we are looking at on a Sunday morning, Psalm 40. And we've seen that this is a psalm of rescue. It's a psalm where the psalmist is, first of all, giving praise to God because God has rescued him from the pit. You see that in verse 2. He, which is God, brought me up out of a horrible pit and out of the miry clay. So from verse 1 then to verse 10, you've got this song of thanksgiving to God. And then from verse 11 to the end of the psalm, it's the second part of the psalm, and our psalmist is once again in that pit. Let's read from verse 11 then through to verse 17. Psalm 40, verse 11. Do not withhold your tender mercies from me, O Lord. Let your loving kindness and your truth continually preserve me. For innumerable evils surround me. My iniquities have overtaken me, so that I am not able to look up. They are more than the hairs of my head, and so my heart fails me. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let them be ashamed and brought to mutual confusion who seek to destroy my life. Let them be driven backward and brought to dishonor who wish me evil. Let them be confounded because of their shame who point the finger at me. And so let all those who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. Let such as love your salvation say continually, the Lord be magnified. But I am poor and needy, yet the Lord thinks upon me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, O my God. And we'll look this morning at verses 16 and 17 of this psalm. Let all those who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. Let such as love your salvation say continually, the Lord be magnified. But I am poor and needy, yet the Lord thinks upon me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, oh my God. Let's ask God to help us then as we turn to this psalm. Lord our God, we thank you that we can turn once again to this psalm. And we've looked at it twice. And we may remember what we've heard, we may not. It doesn't matter, because at the time when we hear it, your work is done in our minds and our hearts for another week. And we thank you, our God, that we are strengthened in the inner man when we hear the word of our God. It's not a memory test that we have to pass week by week to see if we can recall what we have heard. Rather, our God, in the act of hearing, we thank you that your work is done, and in ways that we may not know or even appreciate. Your work of grace is done for us, your people. And so we are made fit again for another week. Lord, we turn our thoughts to this psalm then, and we ask your blessing upon us as we do so in Jesus' name. Amen. So we may or may not remember looking at this psalm, but I guess my job is to remind you of it. So it's a psalm of rescue. It's also referred to as a psalm of healing. Our psalmist, many think it's David, has this experience of being rescued from the pit, and he gives thanks to God for that. And then he has a second occasion when he is once more experiencing the pit. And our text has been found in verse 5 so far, where David says, "Many, O Lord, my God, are your wonderful works." And you can take that verse as the theme for the psalm, the wonderful works of God. Now, that work of rescue has been done by God, and the work of healing has been done by God for our psalmist. But what we've seen so far, if you look again at verse 5, we have seen that the thoughts of God is the place to start when you want to examine the wonderful works of God. So we have begun with God's thoughts. And as you see in verse 17, our psalmist is still thinking about the thoughts of God. Verse 17, I am poor and needy, yet the Lord thinks upon me. So last Sunday, we were getting the big picture. We were saying that when it comes to God's thoughts, we must never try to second guess. We must never say to ourselves, well, we think God is doing X, Y, or Z. We are not to do that because God's thoughts are so much higher and so much greater than we can ever imagine. So the big picture then is of our God continually thinking upon us, and there are layers and layers and layers of God's thoughts towards us, and they are all for our good. And then we also saw last Friday that we can't even begin to declare God's thoughts, but what we also know is that God knows us more intimately than we know ourselves, more than the hairs on our head. So what I want to do this morning then, by looking at these two verses, is just extend that idea of the wonderful thoughts of God. So turn with me to 16 and 17, and I want us to imagine this. Our psalmist is in a company of God's people. So just imagine him then, he's in church on a Sunday morning. And even though he's present with the people of God, he is still, in this sense, in a pit. And we may not examine that. If you look at verses 11 and 12, it seems that our psalmist has sinned in some way, and his sins are many. He's got more problems than he can count. Look at verse 12. Innumerable evils have surrounded me, and he's also suffering at the hands of others. So there's a lot going on for our psalmist, and there he is with all this happening to him, his own sins and his own problems. He's there in the company of God's people. Verse 16, let all those who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. Let such as love your salvation say continually, the Lord be magnified. So he's there in that company, and everyone around him is singing the praises of God, and they're rejoicing in God's salvation, and they're magnifying the name of the Lord, and this is going on around him, and he himself feels unable to join in. And it's quite easy to imagine him standing up maybe as the congregation sing the praises of God, and he's not singing. His voice is quiet, and he feels different to all those around him. He feels separated from them. He feels perhaps alienated from them. He feels very much like he's on his own in his experience. And I've wondered, as I've thought about this psalm all week, I've wondered whether you and I ever have those moments when maybe in church we feel different to all those around us. Everybody else seems to be able to sing the praises of God, but we don't. Have you ever felt like that? You feel somehow cut off or separated because of what's going on for you in your own life. To come on a Sunday and to sing praises and to see everybody else offering worship to God, you yourself feel unable to do so. Now that's what's going on for our psalmist. There's a contrast here, and this is the first contrast for you to notice. There's a contrast between our psalmist and those around him. They are rejoicing, they are magnifying God, they are delighting in God's salvation, but he says, I am poor and needy. And I think that's something that we've all felt at times. And maybe you feel it every Sunday. You've had a difficult week and you come along and I stand up the front and say, let's sing this hymn. And people start to sing the praises of God. And there's nothing in your own heart. You don't feel as if you're able to sing the praises of God. And you're just aware that you are feeling poor and needy whilst all around you are rejoicing and magnifying the Lord. Now, that's what our psalmist is experiencing. It's that contrast. And I would go as far as to say this. Sometimes we feel that contrast, not just in church, but we feel it more generally, don't we? Everybody else seems to be having an okay time. Everybody around us seems to be okay, but we feel different. It's not the same for us. We're having a tougher time, maybe. It's that contrast. And I think what we need to understand from these verses this morning is if we feel like that, then there's a danger, but there's also something to hold in your mind. And of course, the danger is that you can start to feel bad about yourself. You can look around and see people back in church now singing God's praises, and you just don't have the heart for it. And you can easily feel, can't you, that there's something wrong and sinful. There's something to do with a lack of faith about you that you can't join in. You don't feel the same. You don't feel like rejoicing. And the danger is that you could become discouraged. You can start condemning yourself and saying that you're not a very good Christian because I don't feel like I can sing today. I don't have the heart for rejoicing today. That's a danger, isn't it? A while ago, many years now, I heard a sermon on Paul and Silas when they were in jail. Do you remember it? Turn with me, if you've got your Bibles, to Acts and chapter 16. And this is a very well-known account of Paul and Silas being put in prison. And do you remember how the story goes? Acts 16 and verse 25. It says there, at midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And I remember the sermon well. It's all about when you're in a dark place, when you're in your own prison, what you should do, said the preacher, is still be able to sing praises to God. You should still be able to rejoice and worship God. And think of the impact that will have on those around you if you, in the midst of your own darkness, can sing praises to God. Just look at this jailer here in Philippi. There he was listening to Paul and Silas. The other prisoners were doing the same. They were so impressed by this joyful couple who were able to rejoice in God that they then became Christians. Now, that's what we should do, I was told. Sing these praises at your own midnight to God. Now, come back to the psalm. And you see the great contrast in our psalm, Psalm 40. Here is a man who doesn't feel under pressure to sing praises when he's in the pit. He doesn't feel that he ought to be a good witness and offer praises to God whilst he himself is overcome by his sins and he's surrounded by his troubles and his enemies are mounting against him. He is able to be in that congregation and to say, I don't feel this. I'm not rejoicing. I'm poor and I'm needy. And I guess the first thing for me to say to you is if you ever feel like that, then that's absolutely fine. What you have with Paul and Silas is not an example to follow. What you have is a simple description of what it was like for those two when they were in jail on that occasion. But that's not a pattern. We are never told that what we ought to be is like that. Luke simply records what happened on that occasion. But here in the psalm, we have a psalmist who is being held out to us as a pattern. That it's fine when your heart is not in it. It's fine to be in the middle of a congregation of people worshiping God when you yourself are just feeling poor and needy and unable to magnify the Lord. That, says our psalmist, is fine. It's fine sometimes to feel in that way. So turn back to our psalm, Psalm 40, verses 16 and 17. You've got the first contrast. So here it is then between the psalmist and his experiences and how he feels and the rest of the people in whose company he finds himself. But you see there's a second contrast in these verses. So what we've got is verse 17, I am poor and needy. And then we have, yet the Lord thinks upon me. You are my help and my deliverer. And there's the second contrast. I am poor and needy, but you, God, you, look at verse 17, you are my help and you are my deliverer. And that's a wonderful contrast, because what the psalmist is telling us is always hold in mind the contrast between you and God. You may feel poor and needy. You may be struggling with what's going on in your life. You, like the psalmist, you may be overcome with your own sins. Whatever is true of you, what you need to hold on to is what is true of God. What's he like? So if you were poor and needy, God is exactly who you need, because he, verse 17, he is my help and he is my deliverer. And you've got this wonderful picture of the psalmist in his need and God, the one who is able to help him, so absolutely fitted to be what the psalmist needs at this particular time. And it's a wonderful contrast in verse 17 because the words, they match up with each other. So take a look at the verse. The word poor is exactly linked to the word help. So the psalmist feels himself to be empty. He doesn't have the resources. He doesn't feel he has the strength. He's not got the resilience. He looks inside of himself and he doesn't see what he can recognize as a source of power or strength. He's poor, but the Lord is his help. So the Lord is able to do for him what he is unable to do for himself. So the word poor links to the word help in verse 17, and then the word needy is the same again. He is in a situation where he needs to be rescued. He needs somebody greater than himself to come along and to help him. And of course, who's that going to be? Look at verse 17. You are my deliverer. So can I impress upon you this morning, whatever you think of yourself and whatever your circumstances, whatever your struggles, whatever decisions you're making, whatever pressures you're under, whatever is true of you, say to yourself, I am poor and needy, but you, the Lord, the God of my salvation, he is able to be for me whatever I need, and he is able to rescue me in whatever situation I am in. He is the answer and the strength and the hope that I stand in need of. I think too often our thoughts are on I am, and we keep our minds, don't we, very squarely on me. And I'm thinking about me and I'm thinking about, I am poor, and I am needy, and I am this, and I am that, I am lonely, I am sinful, I am struggling, I am. We think of this, don't we, so much. And here is the psalmist saying to you, lift your eyes off who you are and look to God and recognize who he is and recognize that he is able to be to you all that you stand in need of. So here is the second contrast. First, as we've seen then, is between the psalmist and the rest, the company that he's in, how different he feels to them. And then the second contrast is that between him and God. Whatever's true of him doesn't ultimately matter. What matters is what's true of God, who he is, and what he is able to do. Let's have a look at the third contrast then. It's right there in the middle of verse 17. I am poor and needy, and the word yet or but stands for this contrast. But the Lord thinks upon me. So I want you to imagine this. The psalmist is there, as we've seen, in the company of God's people. And I imagine him standing, and the company is singing God's praises, and he's there, and he's very self-conscious. He's aware that he feels different. He's not singing, his heart isn't in it. He's noticing himself, he's noticing how he feels and what he's doing. He's thinking about himself and all that's going on for him and how he feels, what his thoughts are. He's like that, isn't he? Thinking about himself and how different it is for him compared to everyone else. But here's the contrast. And the contrast is this. As he has his thoughts on himself in that act of worship, there's someone else thinking about it. And that someone else is the Lord. So if you imagine God receiving the worship of his people, and there they are singing his praises, and God is glorified in the worship that his people offer him. And I guess you can visualize, it won't be any harm to do it. You can imagine God then receiving the praises of his people. They are magnifying his name through songs, worshiping God. And there's one there in that company who's not feeling it and not worshiping, one who is cast down, poor and needy. And yet what we are being told here is, as God is being worshipped, he notices that one who can't join in with the psalms. He's noticing the one whose heart is too heavy to offer praises to God. And as God notices that one, look at what the psalmist tells you. He says, the Lord thinks upon me. And the word Lord means the God of the covenant, my personal God, the Redeemer God, the God who has saved us and loved us. That God, the Lord, looks upon me. He sees me here in this company. And he sees what a struggle it is for me to sing his praises today. He sees that I'm cast down, and he looks upon me and he thinks about me. And as God does that, he's not doing it in judgment. He's not doing it with criticism. He's not noticing this silent man with a shut mouth and closed lips. He's not noticing him to condemn him or to find fault with him. The Lord looks at him with love and compassion and care and concern. And the Lord thinks upon him. And this phrase in verse 17, it means that the Lord looks at me and understands me. He knows what kind of week I've had. He knows what it was like for me on Tuesday night or Wednesday morning or in the afternoon or when I couldn't sleep at night. He's looking at me as I stand in his presence, worshiping him. He knows the week I've had. He knows all that I've experienced. He knows the anxieties and the joys. He knows it all. And as he looks at me here, and I'm offering him silent heartache, he thinks upon me. And he does so in compassion and love and mercy and grace. And the psalmist holds on to that. I don't have the heart today to sing the praise of God, he says. But the Lord thinks on me and holds me in his mind and looks at me with compassion and with grace. And these are the wonderful works of God. We may feel like we just don't have it in us. We may be focusing on ourselves, but the wonderful works of God are these. He is all that we need. He is everything fitted and suited to meet the needs of his people. And as we come together on a Sunday and we are in a company, he sees us individually in that company, and he knows us individually in the congregation of the saints. And he knows what it's been like. He knows whatever reason there is for us to be needy and for us to be poor. He knows it. And he thinks upon us. And he holds us in his heart. And he loves us. Let's pray together. Lord our God, we thank you for these contrasts